He built an empire by walking away from everything, but when he locked eyes with a daughter he never knew, 18 years of buried guilt came crashing back like a tidal wave. The city pulsed with restless energy, 1,000 lights flickering against the glass towers that seemed to pierce the night sky. Inside one of the tallest of them, Richard Alastair sat alone in his office. The leather chair beneath him was the kind of luxury most men only dreamed of, the desk polished mahogany, the walls lined with plaques of awards and recognition. His empire, Alastair Enterprises, was a name that carried weight in every boardroom across the nation. And yet, as he swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his reflection in the window seemed hollow. Success, fortune, respect, everything he had traded for, everything he had sacrificed for. But at what cost? Richard rarely allowed himself to think of her, the woman with the soft voice and stubborn eyes, the woman he left behind 18 years ago, carrying his child. He had told himself it was the price of greatness. That love was a distraction, and family would weaken him. His mentors had called it decisive leadership. His father had called it manning up. But when the glass of whiskey touched his lips tonight, he tasted only regret. On the other side of the city, in a smaller but buzzing auditorium at St. Helena University, a young woman stood at a podium, her presence commanding in a way that seemed far beyond her years. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice clear, steady, confident. "The future of sustainable technology isn't just about profit margins. It's about responsibility. And if companies like yours invest in the vision I'm laying out today, you won't just be making money, you'll be making history." Applause erupted, loud and genuine. Her name was Elena Moore. 18 years old. Already a star in the making. Her business pitch tonight was not only bold but visionary, and investors in the room were leaning forward, taking notes, whispering to one another. At the back of the auditorium, a woman watched with tears in her eyes. She was proud, her heart swelling with equal parts joy and ache. Caroline Moore, Elena's mother, had carried the burden of raising her daughter alone. She had worked nights, sacrificed dreams, endured whispers from neighbors and the sting of abandonment. But tonight all of that pain felt worth it. Elena's hand brushed the edge of the podium as she delivered her closing words. "Success isn't about how much you take, it's about how much you give back. And I promise you, if you take this step with me, we'll give the world more than it ever dreamed possible." The crowd rose to its feet. A standing ovation. Caroline clapped hardest of all, her heart pounding, her tears finally spilling. She whispered softly under her breath, though no one could hear, "She has his eyes." Back in his office, Richard placed the untouched whiskey back on the desk. His assistant knocked softly at the door before peeking in. "Sir, you've been staring out that window for nearly an hour. The board meeting is in 15 minutes. Richard blinked, pulling himself back into the present. "Right. I'll be there." But as the assistant left, Richard's mind lingered. Something gnawed at him tonight more than usual. Perhaps it was the news article he had read earlier, something about rising youth entrepreneurs making waves. He hadn't paid attention to the details then, but a headline had caught his eye: Elena Moore, the future of sustainable innovation. The name echoed faintly in his head now. Moore. He shook it off. Coincidence. Still, as he straightened his tie and walked out of the office, there was a heaviness in his chest he couldn't explain. The next morning, Elena sat at the kitchen table of their modest home, laptop open, papers scattered. Her mother, Caroline, moved around the kitchen, brewing coffee, her energy brisk and purposeful. "You didn't sleep much," Caroline observed, setting a steaming mug down beside her daughter. Elena smiled faintly. "Too many ideas in my head. I kept thinking of how to refine the proposal." Caroline chuckled softly. "You sounded just like your father when you said that." The words slipped out before she realized, and an uneasy silence fell. Elena looked up, her eyes searching her mother's face. "You mean—" she began slowly, but Caroline quickly shook her head. "Never mind. Forget I said anything." Elena's gaze lingered on her mother. She rarely spoke of him. The man whose name Elena didn't even know. Whenever she asked, Caroline would always say, "He wasn't ready to be a father, and we didn't need him to be." But sometimes, like now, Caroline's eyes betrayed the truth. The wound was still raw. Elena didn't press. She simply sipped her coffee, though her mind spun with questions she longed to ask. That night, Richard attended a gala hosted by one of the city's most prestigious business associations. His presence was expected. He was, after all, the face of wealth and influence. Cameras flashed as he entered, handshakes were exchanged, glasses clinked in toasts. Yet even in the glittering room, Richard felt the strange pull of emptiness. The laughter around him felt hollow. And then, her voice. Across the room, on a smaller stage, a young woman was being introduced as one of the evening's rising stars in business. Richard turned casually at first, then froze. Her posture, her fire, her unshakable confidence, it all hit him like a ghost resurrected. But it wasn't just her presence. It was her eyes. Eyes he had seen before. Eyes he had walked away from nearly 2 decades ago. Elena Moore. The name burned in his mind now, no longer coincidence. Richard's glass trembled in his hand. And somewhere across the room, as Elena delivered her short acceptance speech, Caroline stood quietly in the crowd, her face hidden behind polite applause. She noticed him instantly. Her chest tightened, and in a single breath, 18 years of silence, pain, and unanswered questions came rushing back. Act 1 closing beat, foreshadowing. 3 lives stood in the same room, bound by blood, betrayal, and fate. None of them yet knew how the night would change everything. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, golden light pouring over silk gowns and tailored suits. Champagne glasses clinked as investors, politicians, and magnates mingled with the ease of people accustomed to power. A string quartet hummed softly in the corner, their melody almost drowned by the rise and fall of laughter. Richard Alastair stood near the marble pillar, his usually composed features betraying a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years, unease. His hand gripped the edge of his glass so tightly that condensation trailed down his knuckles. Elena Moore. Her name had been called moments earlier, her figure stepping into the spotlight with a poise that seemed rehearsed by destiny itself. She wore a sleek navy dress, minimal jewelry, nothing ostentatious, yet she commanded the attention of the room. Investors leaned forward. Journalists scribbled. Cameras flashed. But Richard didn't see the rising star the world applauded. He saw 18 years of ghosts. The shape of her jaw, the quiet confidence in her smile, the way she tilted her head ever so. Slightly when she listened, it was Caroline, reborn. But the fire in her voice, the way she seized the room? That was him. And that terrified him more than anything. Caroline stood further back, her heart pounding as her daughter delivered a gracious speech thanking her mentors and supporters. She had not expected Richard to be here tonight, though in truth, she should have. A man like him hovered around every circle of influence. Her hands trembled as she clutched her purse. She wanted to leave. To grab Elena by the wrist and flee the room before the past could uncoil and strike. But Elena, radiant, fearless Elena, had no idea what storm was brewing. Elena's speech ended to resounding applause. She stepped down from the stage, weaving through the crowd with practiced grace, shaking hands, smiling, answering rapid-fire questions from journalists who already saw her as a prodigy. Richard's legs carried him toward her before his mind could stop them. "Miss Moore," he said, his voice low but steady. She turned, and for a moment, time collapsed. Those eyes. Elena blinked, studying the tall man before her. Distinguished, silver streaks at his temples, sharp suit tailored to perfection, the kind of authority that didn't need announcing. She recognized him instantly, not personally, but professionally. "Mr. Alastair," she said politely, extending her hand. It's an honor. Her voice was firm, confident, professional. Richard took her hand, but the moment their palms touched, something inside him twisted. She felt familiar. The shape of her fingers, the warmth of her skin. He almost let his mask slip. "The honor is mine," he said, holding her gaze a second too long. Elena withdrew her hand, tilting her head slightly. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I make it a point to recognize talent when I see it," Richard replied, the words automatic, but his tone uncharacteristically soft. Caroline watched from the sidelines, her throat tight. Every fiber in her body screamed to intervene, but her feet felt rooted to the marble floor. As the evening wore on, Richard found himself drifting closer to Elena, unable to keep away. Every word she spoke, every confident stride, tugged at something buried deep in him. He wasn't the only one noticing her. Investors swarmed, business leaders asked for her card, older men whispered in admiration of her intelligence. And through it all, Elena carried herself with a maturity that made her seem older than 18. But Richard saw the flicker, the brief moment when her smile faltered, when she took a breath too deep, when the weight of expectation pressed down on her. He knew that look. He had worn it once himself. Later, when the crowd thinned and only the clinking of staff collecting glasses filled the room, Richard approached her again. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said, his voice gentler now. Elena glanced at him, a spark of curiosity in her eyes. "Thank you. Coming from you, that means something." "You have a gift," he continued. "Not just intelligence, but presence. People listen when you speak." She smiled faintly, though suspicion lingered. "Are you always this generous with compliments?" Richard's lips curved, but his eyes betrayed him. "Only when they're deserved." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Subtext hummed beneath every word. He wanted to say more. "I know you. I see myself in you. I was wrong to walk away." But the words stuck in his throat, strangled by pride and fear. Elena tilted her head again, that same gesture Caroline once made when studying him. "You look at me like you've known me forever." Richard's chest tightened. Before he could answer, Caroline appeared at her daughter's side, her smile polite but her eyes sharp as glass. "Elena, we should be heading home. It's late." Elena nodded, oblivious to the undercurrent. "Of course, Mom." Richard froze. The world tilted. "Mom." Caroline Moore. Her name sliced through him like a knife. Caroline, who once begged him to stay. Caroline, who carried his child when he chose ambition instead. Caroline, who now stood protectively beside the very child he abandoned. Their eyes locked across the polished marble floor. 18 years of silence, anger, and betrayal crackled between them in that single glance. Caroline's jaw tightened. She turned away first. "Good night, Mr. Alastair," Elena said politely, giving him one last smile before following her mother. Richard watched them leave, his hand trembling at his side. He had seen her. His daughter. The truth he had buried was now alive, breathing, standing before him. And it shook him more than losing his empire ever could. The ballroom emptied, leaving Richard alone with his reflection in the darkened window. For the first time in 18 years, he whispered her name. Elena. And in that whisper lived the storm that was about to unravel his life. The night after the gala was a sleepless one. Richard Alastair sat in his penthouse study, the city lights of Manhattan sprawling endlessly outside his window. The skyline glowed like the empire he once built, yet all he saw was her face. Elena's smile. Elena's eyes. Elena's voice echoing Caroline's when she was young and fierce and full of fire. He poured himself another glass of scotch, but it did nothing to dull the ache in his chest. He had faced hostile takeovers, economic collapses, and courtroom battles that would crush weaker men. But this was different. For 18 years, he had convinced himself that leaving Caroline had been necessary. That success required sacrifice. That emotions were distractions. He told himself that the child she carried would be better off without him. And yet, When he looked into Elena's eyes, all those justifications crumbled. The glass slipped slightly in his grip. He set it down before it could shatter. 18 years, he whispered to the empty room. 18 years, and she never told me. But the truth cut sharper. He never asked. Meanwhile, across the city, Caroline sat on the edge of her modest apartment bed, watching her daughter sleep. Elena's hair fanned across the pillow, her breathing steady, her lips curved in a faint smile even in dreams. Caroline reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face, her heart swelling with pride and pain all at once. Elena had no idea what storm she had just walked into. Caroline had seen the look in Richard's eyes at the gala. Recognition. Shock. Regret. It was the same look he had worn years ago when she told him she was pregnant, the look of a man torn between two worlds but unwilling to sacrifice the one he loved more, power. And now he was back, staring at the child he had abandoned like she was some lost treasure. Caroline clenched her fists. She wouldn't let him take Elena. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, Elena sat at the small kitchen table, flipping through her notes for an upcoming pitch. She sipped her coffee absent-mindedly, her mind half on her work, half on the strange encounter the night before. Her mother moved about the kitchen quietly, too quietly. "Mom," Elena said, not looking up. "What's the deal with Richard Alastair? He acted like he knew me." Caroline froze, the knife in her hand pausing mid-slice. "Elena, men like him always act like they know everyone. It's a tactic, makes you feel seen, important. Don't read into it." Elena finally looked up, eyebrows raised. "You're unusually sharp about him. Did you two ever meet?" Caroline forced a laugh, shaking her head as she resumed chopping. "Everyone in business has crossed paths with Alastair at some point. Don't get distracted by him. Focus on your work." But Helena wasn't convinced. Her mother's voice had a brittle edge she rarely heard. She filed the thought away, deciding not to push, for now. Back in his office, Richard sat through meeting after meeting, but every word spoken by his executives washed over him without meaning. Quarterly reports, profit margins, expansion strategies, none of it mattered. His mind replayed the sound of Elena's voice, the tilt of her head, the way she smiled when she said Mom. Finally, he interrupted his CFO mid-sentence. "That's enough for today." The executives glanced at each other in confusion. Richard never cut meetings short. But his tone brooked no argument. They gathered their papers and left, murmuring among themselves. Alone again, Richard opened his desk drawer and pulled out an old photograph, creased, faded, but still intact. Caroline, 18 years younger, smiling at the camera, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. He had kept it all these years, hidden like a secret he never dared confront. His chest ached. He had missed everything. Her birth. Her first steps. Her first words. Her first day of school. And now she was grown, already building a name for herself in the same ruthless business world he ruled. He whispered to the photograph, his voice raw. "She's mine, isn't she?" Days passed, but the encounter refused to fade. Richard found himself reading articles about Elena, watching clips of her interviews, studying her mannerisms like a man trying to piece together a life he had been denied. Meanwhile, Caroline did everything in her power to shield Elena. She discouraged further contact, deflected questions, and subtly redirected her daughter's focus away from Alastair Industries. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. At a networking event the following week, Elena was once again in the spotlight. She was approached by one of Alastair's top executives, who expressed interest in her upcoming project. Richard arrived late, scanning the crowd until his eyes landed on her. His heart lurched. She was laughing, radiant, commanding attention with the same natural ease she had at the gala. He wanted to go to her, to tell her everything. But Caroline was there too, watching him like a hawk, her protective stance clear. Their eyes met across the room. "Stay away," her gaze warned. Richard clenched his jaw. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. Later that night, Elena confronted her mother again. "Okay, what is going on? You've been acting strange ever since that gala. Every time Richard Alastair's name comes up, you tense like someone just cursed in church." Caroline set her glass of water down with a sigh. "Elena, please. Some men aren't worth your time. He's one of them." Elena frowned. "But why?" He seemed different. Not warm exactly, but interested. Like he saw something in me. Caroline's chest tightened. "That's exactly what makes him dangerous. He sees something, and he takes it. That's how men like him survive." "But he doesn't need anything from me," Elena protested. Caroline's voice cracked as she replied, "You don't know what he's capable of." Elena stared at her mother, bewildered by the intensity of her tone. But Caroline stood and left the room, unable to say more. Richard, too, wrestled with resistance. He wanted to reach out, to tell Elena the truth. But every time he picked up the phone, every time he drafted a message, he stopped. What right did he have? What if she hated him? What if Caroline told her everything, that he had abandoned them? The thought of seeing disappointment in Elena's eyes, of hearing her say "You're not my father," it terrified him more than losing his empire ever could. So he waited, watched, longed. But resistance could only hold for so long. The collision course was already set. Richard stared at his reflection in the darkened window of his penthouse. "I can't," he whispered. "Not yet." Across the city, Caroline sat silently in the dark, whispering the opposite prayer. "Please, God. Not ever." And in her room, Elena dreamed of boardrooms and empires, unaware that her very bloodline was about to turn her world upside down. The deal that would change everything came almost by accident. Elena had been working tirelessly on her startup's pitch, a bold, innovative platform designed to connect small businesses with investors in real time. She poured her soul into the idea, refining every detail, rehearsing until her voice cracked. Her big break came when she was invited to present at the Global Business Innovation Summit, the kind of event where titans of industry sat in the audience, watching closely. It was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. What Elena didn't know, what Caroline feared, was that Richard Alastair had just been announced as the keynote speaker and principal sponsor. On the morning of the event, Caroline stood by the door of their apartment, arms folded, her face tight with unease. "Mom, I'll be fine," Elena said, adjusting the strap of her portfolio bag. "You're acting like I'm about to walk into a lion's den." Caroline's voice was low, almost trembling. "That's exactly what it is." Elena gave her mother a searching look. "You're really not going to tell me why you hate him, are you?" Caroline closed her eyes briefly. "Not today. Just promise me something, Elena. Whatever happens, keep your distance from Richard Alastair. He doesn't deserve a place in your life." Elena sighed. "Mom, it's a business summit. I'm not going there to start a friendship." Still, Caroline's heart told her that once fate forced people into the same room, walls built over years could crumble in an instant. The conference hall gleamed with marble floors and towering glass windows. Chandeliers spilled golden light over rows of tables filled with executives, entrepreneurs, and investors from around the globe. The air buzzed with ambition. Elena checked in, clutching her badge with a mixture of nerves and excitement. She was ready, more than ready. Across the room, Richard arrived with his entourage, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that radiated authority. Cameras followed his every move, reporters whispered his name. But his gaze swept over the crowd, searching for one face. And then he saw her. Elena stood near the stage, focused, determined, oblivious to the storm he carried within him. Richard's heart clenched. She looked so much like Caroline did at that age, and yet she was entirely her own. He wanted to go to her, but Caroline was there, standing off to the side, her posture stiff, her eyes like daggers aimed directly at him. They hadn't spoken in nearly 2 decades. Now, with hundreds of eyes around them, they had no choice. When Elena's presentation began, Richard sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly, trying to appear as nothing more than an interested investor. Elena's voice filled the hall with steady confidence. She spoke with passion, painting a vision of the future that was fresh and bold. Her slides lit up the giant screen behind her, but it was her conviction that held the audience spellbound. Richard felt a swell of pride he couldn't suppress. "That's my daughter." Caroline, however, watched with tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. She knew this moment was Elena's triumph, but she could feel Richard's presence like a shadow over it. The applause was thunderous when Elena finished. Executives leaned forward, already whispering about partnerships. Then the moderator's voice rang out. "Thank you, Elena. Now we'll invite our keynote speaker, Mr. Richard Alastair, to share his thoughts." The room shifted. Elena blinked in surprise. Caroline's stomach dropped. Richard rose, buttoning his jacket, and stepped onto the stage. His speech began as expected, grand visions, bold statements about the future of global markets. But halfway through, his tone changed. His gaze drifted to Elena, and the words grew more personal. "True innovation," Richard said, "doesn't come from clinging to the past. It comes from those bold enough to risk everything, to defy odds, to stand where no one stood before." He paused, eyes locked on her. "And sometimes, innovation is about redemption. About finding in the next generation what we failed to be in our own." A ripple of curiosity ran through the crowd. Elena shifted uncomfortably, unsure why his words seemed aimed directly at her. Caroline gripped the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. After the speech, investors swarmed Elena, offering cards and praise. Richard stayed near the back, waiting for the moment when the crowd would thin. Finally, he stepped forward. "Elena," he said softly. She turned, startled. "Mr. Alastair." He smiled faintly. "Please, call me Richard." She hesitated. "Your speech was inspiring. And yours was remarkable," he replied. His voice carried a warmth she didn't expect. "You remind me of someone I once knew." Before Elena could respond, Caroline appeared at her side like a shield. "That's enough," she snapped. Elena blinked. "Mom." Caroline didn't take her eyes off Richard. "Don't you dare." Richard's jaw tightened. "Caroline. Don't say my name," she cut in sharply. "Not here. Not ever." The tension was so thick that even the nearby executives began to drift away, sensing something raw and personal unfolding. Elena looked between them, confused. "What is going on? Why do you two talk like there's history here?" Caroline grabbed her daughter's arm gently but firmly. "We're leaving." But Richard's voice followed them, low and pained. "She deserves to know the truth, Caroline." Elena froze. "The truth." Caroline's face went pale. "Not here." Richard stepped closer, his eyes desperate. "She's not just any rising star, Caroline. She's my daughter." The words hit like a thunderclap. Elena's mouth fell open, her heart hammering. What did you just say?" Caroline closed her eyes, tears spilling over. She had prayed this day would never come. Richard's gaze burned with conviction. 18 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life. I walked away. But, Elena, I'm your father." The world seemed to tilt. The murmurs of the crowd faded into silence in Elena's ears. She stumbled back a step, staring at her mother, then at Richard. Caroline reached for her hand, but Elena pulled it away, trembling. "You both," her voice cracked. "You both lied to me?" "Elena, please," Caroline begged. "I did it to protect you." Richard took a step closer. "I never stopped thinking of you." The young woman shook her head, her chest rising and falling rapidly. No, this can't be real." She turned and fled, her heels clicking against the marble floor, leaving both Richard and Caroline in stunned silence, staring after her. That night, Elena locked herself in her room, refusing to answer calls or messages from either of them. Her world, once so simple, so clear, had fractured into something she didn't recognize. Caroline sat outside her door, whispering through the wood, "Please, baby, let me explain." But no answer came. Across the city, Richard stood in his office, staring at Caroline's old photograph again. His hands shook as he whispered into the empty room. "She hates me already." For the first time in years, the great Richard Alastair felt powerless. Not against markets, not against rivals, but against the very truth of his own blood. Elena lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Her whole life, she had asked her mother about her father. Every time, Caroline's answers had been vague, evasive, dismissive. And now the truth had arrived in the worst way possible. Her father was alive. Her father was powerful. And her father had abandoned them. She whispered into the darkness, her voice raw. "I don't know who I am anymore." The silence answered back. Elena didn't sleep that night. The city outside her window pulsed with neon and noise, but inside her chest was only silence, broken by the sound of her own ragged breathing. She kept seeing Richard's face, hearing his words, "I'm your father." It didn't feel real. It couldn't be real. And yet, deep down, hadn't she always known something was missing? Every time she asked her mother about her father, the answers had been half-truths. "He's not part of our lives. He made his choices. You don't need him." But why? And now, when she finally had the chance to build her own name, her own world, the truth had come crashing down, threatening to undo everything. The next morning, she sat at the kitchen table, untouched toast on her plate, a storm in her eyes. Caroline moved about the kitchen with nervous energy, avoiding her gaze. "Mom," Elena said flatly. Caroline froze. "Yes." Elena's voice trembled with restrained fury. "Tell me the truth. All of it. No more lies. Who is Richard Alastair to me?" Caroline turned slowly, her hands gripping the counter behind her as though to steady herself. Her eyes were already wet. "Elena, he's your father." The words hung in the air like a blade finally dropping. Elena closed her eyes, swallowing hard. Hearing it confirmed what she already knew, but it didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she whispered. Caroline's voice cracked. "Because I wanted to protect you. From him. From his world." Elena's eyes snapped open. "Protect me. Or punish him. Because it feels like you've been punishing me too." Caroline flinched. "No, Elena, never." "Then why?" Elena's chair scraped against the floor as she stood. "You let me grow up thinking I wasn't worth knowing. That I didn't even deserve a name, a story." Caroline's tears spilled over. "You don't understand. He left us. He chose his career, his empire, over you. I begged him to stay, but he walked away. Do you know what that does to a woman? To a mother?" Elena's lip trembled, but her anger only burned hotter. "So you erased him from my life. You decided I didn't get to know where I came from." "I decided," Caroline said fiercely, "that you deserved a life without disappointment. Without a father who would only hurt you again." The words cut deep. Elena turned away, her chest heaving. "And what about what I deserved, Mom? Didn't I deserve the truth?" That afternoon, unable to bear the weight of her mother's explanations, Elena left the apartment and walked aimlessly through the city. The streets blurred into a maze of steel and glass. She ended up in front of Alastair Tower without even realizing where her feet had carried her. Her pulse pounded as she looked up at the gleaming skyscraper. His empire. His life's work. And somewhere inside, the man who had just turned her world upside down. She marched through the revolving doors before she could talk herself out of it. The receptionist looked up, startled but polite. "Good afternoon. Do you have an appointment?" "No," Elena said firmly. But tell Richard Alastair his daughter is here. The woman blinked, unsure if it was a prank. But the determination in Elena's eyes silenced any doubt. She picked up the phone. Within minutes, Richard appeared in the lobby. His expression shifted from shock to something softer, hopeful, fearful, all at once. "Elena," he breathed. Her throat tightened at the sound of her name in his voice. "I want answers," she said coldly. "And I don't want excuses." He nodded solemnly. "You'll have them. Come with me." He led her to his private office on the top floor. The view stretched endlessly, but Elena barely noticed. She stood rigid, arms crossed, staring at him like an adversary. Richard took a deep breath. For a man who had commanded boardrooms, silenced rivals, and bent markets to his will, this moment terrified him more than any of it. "I was young," he began quietly. "Hungry. Obsessed with building this." He gestured to the window, the empire below. "And when your mother told me she was pregnant, I panicked." Elena's jaw tightened. "I told myself I couldn't be a father. Not then. Not with everything on the line. I told myself she'd be better off without me, that I'd only hold her back." His voice cracked. "But the truth is, I was a coward." Elena's chest rose and fell rapidly. "So you abandoned her. You abandoned me." Richard's eyes glistened. "Yes." The admission stunned her more than excuses would have. "I've thought about it every day since," he continued. "The birthdays I missed. The milestones I'll never get back. I told myself it was too late to fix it, so I buried you. But the moment I saw you, Elena," his voice broke, "I knew I couldn't pretend anymore." Elena turned toward the window, her reflection trembling in the glass. "You had a choice," she whispered. "And you chose yourself." Richard stepped closer, his voice raw. "And it was the worst choice I've ever made." For a long silence, Elena said nothing. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Finally she turned back, tears brimming in her eyes. "Do you know what it's like, growing up with a hole where your father should be? Watching other kids bring their dads to school, to games, to graduations, and pretending you don't care." Richard's face crumpled. "Elena, do you know what it's like to look in the mirror and wonder what half of you even is?" Her voice broke. "I asked Mom so many times. And every time, she told me I didn't need to know. But I did. I do." Richard reached out a trembling hand, then stopped himself, afraid to touch her without permission. "You're right. You deserved better. You deserved me to be there." Her tears finally fell, hot and angry. "Then why wasn't I enough to make you stay?" The question shattered him. He sank into the chair behind his desk, burying his face in his hands. For the first time in decades, Richard Alastair wept. "I don't know," he admitted hoarsely. "I don't know why I was so blind. All I know is that I would give everything I have, everything, to go back and choose differently." The sight of this powerful man broken before her shook Elena to her core. She didn't forgive him, not yet. But for the first time, she believed him. Still, the wound was too raw. She turned toward the door. "I need time," she whispered. Richard stood quickly. "Elena, please." She shook her head. "Don't. I can't right now." And with that, she walked out, leaving him standing in the vast, empty office, his heart aching with the weight of 18 lost years. That evening, Elena returned home to find her mother waiting in the living room, eyes red from crying. "Where were you?" Caroline asked softly. Elena dropped her bag on the chair. "With him." Caroline's face tightened. "Elena." "I needed to hear it from his mouth," she said firmly. "I needed to know why." Caroline lowered her gaze. "And what did he say?" "That he was a coward." Caroline flinched. Elena sank into the couch, exhausted. "Why didn't you ever tell me, Mom? You could have let me decide how I felt about him." Caroline's eyes filled again. Because I was afraid. Afraid he'd hurt you the way he hurt me. Afraid you'd chase after him and he wouldn't love you back. Afraid you'd see him as a hero when he wasn't one. Her voice cracked. And maybe I was afraid you'd love him more than me. The confession stunned Elena. For the first time, she saw not just her mother, but a young woman who had once been abandoned, broken, left to raise a child alone. Tears slipped down Elena's cheeks as she whispered, I could never love anyone more than you. Caroline let out a sob and pulled her daughter into her arms. Elena let her, even as her heart remained torn between love, betrayal, and a longing she couldn't quite name. Elena sat awake that night, staring at the photo on her nightstand, her and her mother, smiling at a park years ago. She traced the edge of the frame with her finger, her heart aching. Now she had two truths inside her, a mother who had loved her fiercely but kept her in the dark, and a father who had abandoned her but now longed to return. Two truths. Two wounds. And only time would reveal which love would heal her, or break her further. Elena didn't call Richard. Not for days. But that didn't stop him from reaching out. Carefully. Gently. Never demanding. Always waiting for her to decide. The first text came on a Tuesday evening. I know you don't owe me anything. But I'd like to see you again, even if just for coffee. No business talk. Just father and daughter, if you'll let me. She stared at it for hours, her phone heavy in her hand. She typed a dozen replies and deleted them all. Finally, she set it down and went to bed without answering. The second message came 2 days later. Your pitch at the summit was extraordinary. Investors are still talking about it. Whatever else happens, know that I'm proud of you. That one made her cry. By Saturday, Elena found herself pacing outside a quiet cafe in the village. She didn't remember deciding to come, but her feet had brought her here anyway. Through the window, she saw him already inside. Alone. No assistants. No entourage. Just Richard Alastair, billionaire tycoon, sitting with his hands folded nervously around a cup of coffee. For the first time, he looked small. Human. Elena pushed the door open, the bell above it chiming. Richard's head snapped up, and for a moment, raw hope lit his eyes. Elena, he breathed, standing. She nodded, awkwardly. Hi. They sat across from each other, the silence stretching until Elena finally broke it. You don't do this often, do you? Richard frowned slightly. Do what? Wait, she said. Alone. In silence. Without people running around to bring you things. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. No, I don't. But for you, I'd wait forever. The words landed heavier than he intended, and Elena looked away, her throat tight. For the next hour they talked. Not about the past, not yet, but about small things. Elena told him about her favorite books, the way she always got nervous before pitching even though no one could tell, the neighborhood she and Caroline had lived in since she was 5. Richard listened like every word was treasure. In turn, he shared pieces of himself she hadn't expected. How he used to sneak out of board meetings to watch jazz musicians play downtown. How he collected old watches because they reminded him that time was the only thing even he couldn't control. How he never cooked, but once tried to bake bread during the pandemic and nearly set off the building's sprinklers. Elena laughed despite herself. The mighty Richard Alastair, defeated by flour and yeast? He chuckled, shaking his head. I'm ruthless in boardrooms. Useless in kitchens. The laughter softened something between them, like a bridge slowly lowering. The weeks that followed saw more cautious meetings. Walks in Central Park. Lunches at quiet spots where no one recognized them. One chilly afternoon, as golden leaves fell around them, Richard paused mid-conversation and asked softly, Do you mind if I tell people you're my daughter? Elena froze, hugging her coat tighter. I'm not ready for that. Richard nodded quickly. Of course. I'll wait until you are. Or, if you never are. The humility in his voice startled her. She had expected arrogance, entitlement. But instead, he gave her space. "Thank you," she said quietly. Despite herself, she began to see him not just as the man who left, but as the man trying to come back. One evening, she received a call after a brutal day at work. An investor had pulled out at the last minute, and her project was on the verge of collapse. She hadn't meant to call him. She just did. Richard answered on the first ring. "Elena." Her voice cracked. "Everything's falling apart." Within 30 minutes, he was at her door, no questions asked. He didn't barge in with solutions or money. He just sat beside her on the couch as she vented, his presence steady and grounding. Finally, when she was done, he said softly, "Then we rebuild. That's what we Alistairs do. We fall, we rebuild." The word we caught her off guard. For the first time, it didn't feel foreign. But not everyone was ready for this fragile bond. Caroline watched from the sidelines, torn apart. She saw her daughter coming home with stories about Richard, saw the light in her eyes when she spoke of him, and it broke her heart. One evening, she confronted Elena in the kitchen. "You're seeing him, aren't you?" Caroline's voice was tight. Elena froze, then nodded. "Yes." Caroline's eyes filled with tears. "After everything he did, after everything I went through, how can you?" Elena's own eyes burned. "Because he's my father, Mom. I can hate him and still want to know him. Don't you understand?" Caroline's voice cracked. "I understand too well. And I'm terrified. He'll hurt you, Elena. He'll leave again. He always leaves." Elena reached out, touching her mother's hand. "Maybe. But maybe he won't. Maybe he's trying this time." Caroline pulled away, her voice barely a whisper. "And what if trying isn't enough?" The next day, Richard took Elena to his private library at the tower. The room smelled of leather and old paper, with shelves reaching to the ceiling. He handed her a small, velvet box. "I want you to have this." Inside was a delicate gold bracelet, worn but well kept. "It belonged to my mother," Richard said softly. "I kept it all these years, waiting for the day I had someone to give it to. I should have given it to you long ago." Elena touched it reverently, her throat tightening. "It's beautiful." "It's yours," he said simply. For the first time, she saw him not as a titan of industry, but as a man, fragile, regretful, reaching. And for the first time, she let him hug her. That night, Elena wore the bracelet as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She still didn't forgive him. She still hurt. But the bracelet felt warm against her skin, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, something broken could begin to heal. For the first time since the gala, she whispered into the dark with a hint of hope. "Maybe I'm not alone after all." And somewhere across the city, Richard sat in his office, smiling faintly at the thought that for the first time in 18 years, he wasn't alone either. For weeks, Elena carried the bracelet everywhere she went. Its weight on her wrist was subtle but constant, a quiet reminder of Richard's efforts to rebuild something long lost. She hadn't told anyone about it, except her mother, who noticed it one morning at breakfast. Caroline's eyes went immediately to the bracelet, then to her daughter's face. "Elena," she said, her voice trembling, "where did you get that?" Elena hesitated. "It was his mother's. He gave it to me." Caroline's lips pressed into a thin line. "Of course he did. That's what Richard does, he buys his way into people's hearts." "It wasn't about money," Elena protested, clutching her wrist. "It was real. I could feel it." Caroline's eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm. "You want to believe that. But I know Richard. And sooner or later, he'll prove me right." Elena shook her head, unwilling to hear more. But Caroline's words lingered like smoke. That week, Richard invited Elena to a private shareholders' dinner. "It's nothing formal," he assured her. "Just a small gathering. But I'd like you to come. Not as a businesswoman. As my daughter." The word daughter still jolted her. She wanted to say yes, but hesitation clawed at her chest. Will Mom be okay with it? She asked quietly. Richard's jaw tightened. Your mother and I will never agree about me. But this isn't about her. It's about us. Elena nodded slowly. Against her better judgment, she agreed. The dinner was grander than Richard had implied. A chandelier bathed the hall in golden light, and powerful men and women mingled with champagne glasses in hand. When Richard introduced Elena as his daughter, heads turned. Whispers filled the room. Some congratulated him, others looked skeptical. Elena tried to remain composed, but the attention unsettled her. This wasn't just about meeting his colleagues, this was unveiling her to his world. Halfway through the evening, she overheard two executives whispering near the bar. So that's the girl? Clever move. Humanizes him right before the merger. Yeah. Smart play. A long-lost daughter. Makes him look like a family man. Elena's stomach dropped. Was this why he wanted me here? She excused herself to the bathroom, hands shaking as she stared at her reflection. When she returned, Richard was mid-toast, praising her brilliance, her potential, her Alistair blood. The applause was thunderous. But Elena felt exposed, used, like a pawn in a game she hadn't agreed to play. After the dinner, she confronted him in his car. You used me, she said, her voice breaking. Richard frowned, taken aback. What? No. Elena, I wanted them to see you, to know you. They already knew me, she snapped. As Elena Ramirez, the businesswoman I built myself into. Tonight, I wasn't me. I was your trophy. Is that what you think? His voice hardened. That I would parade you around for image? Her eyes burned. I don't think. I heard it. Your men said it. This was about the merger. Richard's hands gripped the steering wheel. They don't know what they're talking about. You're my daughter, Elena. I wanted the world to see that. But why now? She shot back. After 18 years. Why suddenly claim me when it's convenient? His silence was answer enough. Elena pulled off the bracelet and dropped it in his lap. Don't call me again. The fallout was immediate. Caroline found her daughter crying in the kitchen later that night, mascara streaking down her cheeks. What happened? Caroline whispered, pulling her into her arms. Elena sobbed against her shoulder. You were right. He hasn't changed. He'll never change. Caroline held her tighter, torn between relief and sorrow. She had wanted to be wrong, for Elena's sake. But watching her daughter's hope crumble broke her heart. Meanwhile, Richard sat in his penthouse, the bracelet still warm from her wrist resting on the desk before him. 4 hours, he stared at it, replaying every word, every accusation. Was I using her? He whispered aloud. Or was I just proud? But deep down, he knew the truth. He had rushed. He had wanted the world to see her not just for who she was, but as his. And in doing so, he had proven Caroline right. Days turned into weeks. Elena ignored his calls. She threw herself into her work with a ferocity that startled even her peers. But late at night, when the world went quiet, she thought of his laugh, his awkward stories, the way he had sat beside her when everything fell apart. The betrayal didn't erase the bond they had begun to build. It just poisoned it. Caroline noticed her daughter's restlessness and tried to comfort her. You don't need him, she whispered. You never did. But Elena only thought, then why does it hurt so much? The real breaking point came one afternoon when Elena attended a press conference for her startup. Midway through the event, Richard arrived uninvited. Cameras flashed as he walked in, commanding the room with his presence. He didn't speak to the press. He didn't speak to her. Instead, he placed the bracelet on the podium where she stood, met her eyes with a silent plea, and walked out. The gesture, meant to heal, only deepened the wound. Because once again, he had turned their private bond into a public spectacle. Elena's voice faltered. The rest of her speech stumbled. And as soon as it ended, she locked herself in the bathroom, clutching her chest as though her heart might burst. That night, Elena wrote him a message she never sent. You can't force your way into my life. You can't fix 18 years with grand gestures. You can't parade me in front of the world and expect me to smile. If you want to know me, you have to earn me. But I don't think you know how. She deleted it. But the words stayed, etched into her heart. Across the city, Richard sat alone with the bracelet once more, whispering the words he should have said aloud. I don't know how. But I want to learn. The days after the press conference unfolded like winter, cold, brittle, and unforgiving. For Richard, the city skyline outside his penthouse window no longer shimmered with promise. The glass towers he had once conquered looked back at him like grave markers of ambition, monuments to what he had gained and what it had cost. He hadn't realized how heavy silence could be until Elena stopped answering his calls. Until her absence became a tangible presence in his life. The bracelet lay on his desk once again. He couldn't seem to put it away. Couldn't seem to let it go. Every time he picked it up, he felt the weight of all the unsaid words pressing into his palm. I don't know how to do this, he admitted aloud, his voice hoarse, as though confessing to the empty air might summon an answer. Elena, meanwhile, found no comfort in her triumphs. The startup that once brought her joy now felt hollow. Every board meeting was a battle to suppress the ache gnawing at her chest. She replayed his words. His proud smile. His toast. The way he had called her daughter. She wanted to erase him. But instead, he filled every quiet moment. Late at night, when the world was still, she sat by her bedroom window with a cup of tea, staring at the same skyline he stared at, wondering if he was awake, too. Her mother noticed her sleepless nights. Elena, Caroline said softly one morning, you can't keep torturing yourself like this. I'm not, Elena lied. But Caroline only sighed. You want to forgive him. You're just afraid of what that means. Elena froze. The truth stung. One evening, Richard found himself outside the small neighborhood bookstore Elena loved. He hadn't planned it. His car had driven him there, as if pulled by something beyond logic. Through the window, he saw her, seated cross-legged on the floor, thumbing through a stack of journals. Her hair fell loose over her shoulders, her brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't go in. He didn't want to ruin the peace on her face. Instead, he leaned against the car, watching quietly, feeling the strange mix of pride and sorrow twist in his chest. How do I make this right? He thought. For the first time in his life, Richard admitted he couldn't win her back with power, wealth, or grand gestures. If he wanted Elena's forgiveness, he had to become something he had never been before, humble. The choice crystallized in him a week later. He sat across from Caroline in a small cafe, their first meeting alone in nearly 2 decades. The tension between them was palpable, years of unspoken words pressing against the tiny table. I don't know where to start, Richard admitted, staring into his coffee. She hates me. And maybe she should. Caroline studied him quietly, trying to reconcile the man before her with the arrogant boy she once loved. You can't undo the past, she said finally. But you can choose what kind of man you are. Now, the problem is, Richard, you've always chosen yourself. Her words cut, but he didn't flinch. For once, he didn't argue. I want to change that, he said simply. Caroline's eyes softened, though her guard remained. Then prove it. Not to me. To her. And not with money or spectacle. Show her you can listen. Show her you can stay. Stay. The word echoed in him like a prayer. That weekend, Elena attended a youth entrepreneur panel at a community center. It was the kind of event her father would never usually notice. Small, unglamorous, no press coverage. But when she walked into the room, there he was. Richard sat in the back row, no entourage, no expensive suit, just a simple shirt with the sleeves rolled. He didn't speak. He didn't make his presence known. He just listened, eyes fixed on her as though every word she spoke mattered more than any billion-dollar deal. At first, Elena bristled. He's following me. But as the hours passed, she saw something different. He stayed through the whole panel. He clapped when she finished. And when the crowd dispersed, he quietly stacked chairs alongside volunteers, sweat darkening the fabric of his shirt. No cameras. No reporters. No performance. Just him. When she finally approached him, her voice was sharp. "Why are you here?" He turned, breathing heavy from lifting tables. His expression was calm, unguarded. "To listen," he said simply. She narrowed her eyes. "To use me again?" "No," he shook his head. "I'm done using people. I came because I wanted to understand you. Not the businesswoman. Not the rising star. Just you." Her chest tightened. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to throw every hurt back in his face. But his tone, quiet, steady, stripped of pride, wasn't the man she had known weeks ago. Still, the wound was raw. "And what happens when you get bored of listening?" He hesitated, then met her eyes. "Then I'll still be here. Even if you never forgive me." The honesty in his voice disarmed her. She didn't answer. She simply turned and walked away. But for the first time, she didn't feel anger burning in her chest. She felt something scarier, hope. That night, she told her mother what happened. "He's trying," Elena whispered, her voice small. Caroline looked at her daughter for a long moment. "Be careful, sweetheart. Hope can heal. But it can also break you twice." Elena nodded. But deep down, she already knew her choice was forming. The next morning, Elena found a letter slipped beneath her office door. It wasn't on Alastair Company's stationery. It wasn't typed. It was handwritten, the ink smudged in places where his hand had trembled. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve a second chance. But I want to earn it, not with wealth or words, but with time. If you ever give me that chance, I'll be here. Waiting." For the first time since she met him, Elena cried not from pain, but from possibility. The choice was hers now. And for once, Richard was willing to wait. Spring came early that year. The city bloomed with cherry blossoms, their petals drifting through the streets like confetti. Elena walked past them every morning, notebook in hand, preparing for the biggest presentation of her career. Her startup had been invited to pitch before an international investment board, an opportunity that could change everything. But beneath her composure, a storm still brewed. The letter Richard had left haunted her. She carried it folded in her planner, its creases soft from the number of times she had read it. She hadn't answered. She didn't know if she could. Forgiveness was not a gift she gave lightly. And yet, part of her wanted to believe him. Richard had not called since. Not once. Instead, he showed up quietly in places she didn't expect, never close enough to intrude, but always within reach. At her community panels. At fundraisers. Even at her mother's neighborhood cafe, where he sat quietly at the corner table and left before she arrived. He had stopped trying to claim her publicly. He stopped talking about her at business meetings. He stopped making grand gestures. He just waited. And the strange thing was, it made her ache more than the betrayal. The day of the pitch arrived. Elena wore a tailored cream suit, her hair swept back in a neat bun, her braceletless wrist trembling slightly as she clutched her notes. She told herself she didn't need him. She had built this company, this moment, on her own. But when she stepped on stage, scanning the rows of powerful investors, her eyes found him. Richard sat near the back. Not in the center where he could be seen. Not surrounded by allies. Just one man, silent, watching her with a kind of pride that didn't demand ownership. And somehow, that gave her strength. Her pitch was flawless. She spoke with fire and clarity, her vision unfolding like poetry. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. She had done it. But when she turned, her eyes went instinctively to the back row. Richard was gone. After the event, she found him outside, leaning against a column in the courtyard, hands tucked in his pockets. "You didn't stay," she said softly. He turned, startled. then offered a small smile. You didn't need me in there. You never did. Her throat tightened. Then why come at all? Because I wanted to see you fly, he admitted, voice low. Not as my daughter. Not as anyone's. Just as you. Something inside her cracked. For months she had fought him. For his arrogance, his pride, his timing, his flaws. But this quiet surrender was different. You really mean that? She whispered. Richard nodded, eyes glassy. Elena, I can't change what I did 18 years ago. I can't give back the years I stole. But if all I can do now is stand in the shadows and watch you shine, I'll do it. Every time. Her eyes blurred with tears. Why? He swallowed hard. Because I love you. And I don't deserve it back. Not yet. Silence fell between them, thick with years of longing and hurt. Then, slowly, Elena stepped closer. You keep saying you don't deserve me, she whispered. But don't you see? That's the only reason I can believe you now. Her hand trembled as she reached into her bag. She pulled out the bracelet, worn, tarnished, but still whole. I kept it, she said softly. Even when I was angry. Even when I wanted to throw it away. Because part of me wanted to believe you could change. Richard's breath caught. Elena. Her lips trembled. So I'll give you one chance. Not as a CEO. Not as some grand figure. Just as Dad. The word shattered him. He pressed a hand to his face, tears slipping through his fingers as his body shook with quiet sobs. It was the first time in decades he had cried where someone could see. And Elena didn't turn away. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, holding him like the child she had once been, and the woman she had become. Caroline found them like that minutes later, her breath catching at the sight. For a long moment, she stood frozen, watching the man who had once abandoned her now broken and clinging to the daughter he had once denied. Her instinct was to protect Elena, to pull her away. But something in Richard's tears, something in Elena's eyes, stopped her. Maybe, just maybe, he had learned. Caroline cleared her throat softly. The car's waiting, sweetheart. Elena turned, still holding Richard's hand. Mom, come with us. Richard's eyes widened, but he said nothing. Caroline hesitated, torn between resentment and the possibility of peace. Then, slowly, she nodded. For the first time in 18 years, they walked together, not as a couple, not as enemies, but as parents bound by the love of the same girl. Months later, the three of them stood in the same ballroom where it had all begun, the gala that had first sparked recognition. This time, Elena wasn't just being honored. She was headlining the event as the youngest woman ever to secure a multi-million-dollar international partnership. When she took the stage, she glanced toward the crowd. Her mother sat in the front row, her pride radiant. Beside her sat Richard, quiet, humbled, not the man who had once tried to claim her, but the man who had learned to stand beside her. As the applause thundered, Elena smiled, repeating the gesture she once gave him months ago, the slight tilt of her head, the spark in her eyes. This time, it wasn't suspicion. It was love. And Richard, for the first time in his life, felt whole.
Get ready for more. Hit that subscribe button and join the ride. Let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments below. Trust me, you won't want to miss tomorrow's story. It's going to be epic. Stay locked in for more thrilling tales